to a Hope 1032 podcast.
The Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Natasha Moore, because life's just better with a book.
Welcome to the Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Katrina Clifford. And today we're joined by Elanda Joyce from the Little Lost Bookshop. Now, sadly, Natasha Moore can't be with us today, but for a very good reason. She recently got married, which is very exciting. So Katrina Clifford will actually be reviewing a book that Natasha recommended to her. So Natasha will be with us in spirit, at least. Today, we're going to be sharing some very interesting biographies, some of famous people, some of the not so famous. So Katrina has been reading Trevor Noah's biography. The Daily Show host shares his story of growing up in South Africa during the final years of apartheid. It's also a tribute to the mum who fought for him to have a better life. His book is called Born a Crime: Stories from a South African Childhood. Elanda from the Little Lost Bookshop has been reading The Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw. At age 75, Ruth Shaw now has a seemingly stable, secure and peaceful life running 2 bookshops in a remote part of the South Island of New Zealand. But most of Ruth's life has been anything but peaceful. Crammed with adventure, she's spent much of her life trying to outrun tragedy, loss and 4 marriages. Now she's sharing her remarkable life story. And I've been reading Michael McIntyre's autobiography, A Funny Life. It's a story of how a slightly pudgy, insecure, in-debt, struggling, middle-aged comic became the biggest selling comedian in the world. It's a story of persistence, of dusting yourself off after disaster, and of celebrating your wins. But it's also about making the most of the chances you're given. But first, let's hear from Trevor Noah's biography, Born a Crime: Stories from a South African Childhood.
There were so many perks to being white in a black family. I can't even front. I was having a great time. My own family basically did what the American justice system does. I was given more lenient treatment than the black kids. Misbehavior that my cousins would have been punished for, I was given a warning and let off. And I was way naughtier than either of my cousins. It wasn't even close. If something got broken or someone was stealing Granny's cookies, it was me. I was trouble. My mom was the only force I truly feared. She believed if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. But everyone else said, no, he's different, and they gave me a pass. Growing up the way I did, I learned how easy it is for white people to get comfortable with a system that awards them all the perks. I knew my cousins were getting beaten for things that I'd done, but I wasn't interested in changing my grandmother's perspective, because that would mean I'd get beaten too. Why would I do that? So that I'd feel better? Being beaten didn't make me feel better. I had a choice. I could champion racial justice in our home, or I could enjoy Granny's cookies. I went with the cookies.
Best known as Jon Stewart's successor on The Daily Show, Trevor Noah's biography is funny as you'd expect, but it also covers some serious issues like colonialism, apartheid, poverty and racial prejudice. Set during the final days of apartheid in South Africa, Trevor Noah's early years were defined by his, inverted commas, mixed race. He was born to a white Swiss father and a black mother at a time when such a relationship could result in a custodial sentence. How he overcame this disadvantage was largely a credit to his formidable mother. Katrina Clifford's been reading this one. Hey, Katrina.
Hey, Katrina.
So this book was recommended to you by Natasha Moore, and I know you don't normally read a lot of biography, so I'm guessing she must have given it a pretty good rap.
She really did. She spoke very highly of it, said that she was particularly fascinated by it, and I thought, I should branch out and read a biography, and this feels like it's got a good, solid recommendation. And, Trevor Noah's funny, so how could it not be a good read? And it turned out to be really fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so can you tell us a bit about his early years in South Africa?
Yeah, so Trevor Noah is born into this really interesting and unusual situation that he is growing up under apartheid in South Africa, but he doesn't actually fit into any of the groups that define society. So under apartheid, you could be white or you could be black or you could be coloured, and he's none of them. He's mixed race, which feels to me like it should be the same as coloured, but actually isn't. If you're coloured, it means you have two coloured parents and you end up coloured. And so he doesn't fit in with the white community. He doesn't fit in with the black community. He doesn't fit in with the coloured community. He's really an outsider. And he experiences a whole lot of ostracism because of this, but also quite a lot of privilege depending on where he is. So when he's hanging out with his black family, they treat him as though he's white and he's special. When he goes along to a school that is predominantly black, he can fit in with the white kids in a strange way, but doesn't ever feel like he belongs. So it's very much a tale of an outsider who is growing up in a situation of disadvantage, but also privilege at the same time, and his observations of this world that he's growing up in that really just doesn't make any sense a lot of the time.
So is the whole book set in South Africa?
Yeah, so it really just covers his childhood up to kind of his early 20s, so before he moves to the States. The way it's written is actually quite interesting. It's not kind of a chronological story of his childhood. It's more written as, as the title suggests, stories. So here's a particular incident that says something about his life, and here's another incident, and here's another incident. So it can feel a little bit disjointed reading it because you don't kind of get the bits in between. But the incidents themselves, it's this fascinating mix of a childhood that was clearly quite traumatic in a lot of ways. There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of violence, there's family violence. So just a warning for anybody who's reading it, there is certainly domestic violence in this biography. But he approaches it with his kind of characteristic sense of humour, a huge amount of intelligence. And so the reading experience kind of almost jolts you from time to time from these hugely traumatic experiences that he's recounting. His friends end up in prison and he ends up in prison at one point in time. But you can see how he grows through it, how he learns about the world, how he learns about who he is, and tries to work out what is his place going to be in this disjointed world in which he doesn't quite fit anywhere.
So what's his writing style like? Is it kind of like how he talks on TV?
Yeah, it's very conversational, so it's very easy to read. What I really like about it is he takes this really lighthearted tone towards a lot of what he is talking about. And then every now and then we'll just kind of drop in things that are deeply problematic. So there's this great description early on where he's talking about his mum, who's really absolutely the heroine of the book and the heroine of his life, and talking about how she drags them along to 3 different churches every Sunday. And so he compares, what is white church like and what is coloured church like and what is black church like. And black church goes for hours and hours and hours. It's by far the longest. And he makes this comment about how black people have to go to church for longer. Their church has to last for longer because they suffer more. And it's just this kind of, actually this recognition of the suffering of the black people of South Africa. But it's just dropped in there and then he moves on to the next thing. It would be a very easy read for even quite a young teenager because it's very conversational, it's very funny, but at the same time there's just these little drops of, actually, no, life is hard. Life as a mixed race person in South Africa at that time was hard. Life as a black person in South Africa at that time was and still is hard, but he manages to maintain that sense of humour throughout.
You mentioned about his relationship with his mum and how the book is really a tribute to her. What more can you tell us about their relationship?
Yeah. So she is this fiercely independent woman who goes out and has a relationship with a white man, even though it's illegal, and has this son who is, as he says, born a crime, and is constantly just kind of ignoring the laws. So she goes off and lives in this apartment in a part of town where she's not allowed to live because she's black. She's takes Noah back to her family, even though he's not allowed to live in the townships because he's not black, he's mixed race. So she very much obeys the rules that work for her and ignores the ones that don't. She's intelligent, motivated, she sets up her own business. So what she shows to Noah, I think, is really what an independent, intelligent, strong woman looks like. she doesn't let him get away with anything. So, like, she's the only person in his life really who will tell him off when he's been naughty, when he's broken the rules. She won't brook his sass and his sarcasm and his humorous way of getting everybody else on side. Just doesn't work with his mum, and he absolutely loves her for it. There's a story about how one Sunday their car broke down, and Trevor says to his mum, well, clearly this is a sign from Jesus that we're not supposed to go to church today. And his mother basically just whacks him over the head and says, we're getting on the bus. Like, don't you try that with me. And so really, she is, because she is this strong, determined woman that really shapes the way that he sees the world, but also just gives him this huge amount of respect for her. And I think for women more generally, actually.
And so does he land anywhere with his exploration of his mum's faith?
The final chapter of the book is really fascinating in this particular regard. So throughout the book, he mentions a few times that his mother gets shot in the head by his stepfather. And for most of the book, this is just kind of mentioned as a passing thing that happens. And mentioned in the sort of way that leads you to assume that she's been killed. You know, you get shot in the head. That's basically the way it happens. It turns out the way she is shot, the bullet miraculously misses her spine and misses her brain and misses everything and just kind of comes out the other side. She's only in hospital for a week and then she's out of hospital. And Noah reflects on this and can only conclude that it's a miracle. And so has these thoughts and these comments about, my mum is one of Jesus's biggest fans. She goes to church all the time. She prays all the time. She talks about Jesus all the time. And so this is clearly a miracle and I don't quite know what to do with it. He can see how real and how deep his mother's faith is. And he admires that. He makes fun of a lot of things. He never makes fun of faith. He never makes fun of his mother's faith. That's always a thing that can only be treated with respect. And so you get to kind of the end of this last chapter where it turns out she doesn't have health insurance. And he says to it, why don't you have any health insurance? Don't be ridiculous. You used to have health insurance. Why don't you have it? Just, I don't need health insurance. Jesus is my health insurance. And look, he kept me safe through this thing. And he makes this quip about how, Jesus hasn't paid your hospital bill, has he? I've paid your hospital bill because you didn't have health insurance. And she says, Jesus didn't pay my hospital bill, but Jesus gave me the son who paid the hospital bill for me. So, what are you going to do with that? And he doesn't make a mockery of it in any way. He just kind of goes, she's consistent with her faith there. That's kind of where the book ends. He never really states where he stands, but it's clear the respect that he has for his mother's faith is very clear, and always portrayed in a really positive light.
Okay, so just to wrap up, what did you learn from this book? What kind of life lessons can be drawn from it? And why do you think it's worth a read?
I think part of it was worth a read simply for the insights that it gave me into life into South Africa under that transition. Apartheid ends when he's 10 years old. And I think the impression that we often get is they got rid of apartheid and then everything was fine. And what you see is really how much society struggled to shift from apartheid to post-apartheid, what that meant on the ground for individuals, how deeply embedded the idea of race was and still is in South African society. One of the things that was really interesting for me was seeing how Noah has always used his kind of outsider status to examine the world, to investigate the world, to explore the world, and eventually, make fun of the world. And if you watch his comedy, you see how he does that to American society. He's got that outsider status and so can comment on how ridiculous America is, or their politics, or their gun laws, or whatever it is that he's talking about. And so the way he's kind of gone, well, this is who I am. How can I make the most of what it is instead of just kind of giving up or complaining about it, both of which would have been perfectly fair options for him to just kind of go, none of this is my fault, but it's all just too hard. kind of went, no, let's find the good, let's find the funny, let's find the positives, work out how can I get myself out of this situation I've been born into, but still be connected to it and to the positive qualities that it's given me. So I found that quite inspiring, actually.
Thank you, Katrina. That's Katrina Clifford. We've been talking about Trevor Noah's autobiography, Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. Thanks, Katrina. Now, Alanda has been reading The Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw. At 75, Ruth was finally persuaded to write her story. Her life was a full and dramatic one, full of adventure, but also of grief and loss. She sailed the seas, run a pig farm, worked with junkies and prostitutes in King's Cross, adventured in exotic places, been married 4 times, and for the last 38 years, she's led a peaceful life running 2 bookshops with her husband Lance in the South Island of New Zealand. Alanda Joyce from the Little Lost Bookshop's been enjoying this one. Hi, Alanda.
Hi, Katrina.
I really like to visit these shops now, I must admit, and I haven't even read the book yet. What's this book really about, Alanda?
Oh, this book is amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. As you say, Ruth now runs 2 little bookshops in New Zealand, but the story is little anecdotes from the bookshop and the interesting customers that she meets, interspersed with the story of her life. And her life story is just there is grief and sadness in it, but it's just an amazing, amazing story. So it was a really good read.
What are some of the kind of, I mean, I know she's lived a very long life and there's a lot of things that happen in the book, but what are some of the sort of key experiences that she shares in the book?
Yeah, so it a lot of it is, I would say, a form of running. When Ruth is a teenager, she's sexually assaulted, and the trauma of that is something that she, I think, is trying to hide from for a large part of her life. Quite early in the story, she has a child who is taken from her, and she doesn't really get to spend any time with the child, and it's adopted. And she has this sense of she can't sit still, she can't stay in one place for too long after that, and that inspires all these wild adventures all through the story. She has she has relationships and is kind of trying to find a place that is home, but there's always these things kind of driving her on and driving her on to the next thing. But the story itself is so full and fascinating and interesting. She starts off joining the Navy as a young woman and then runs away from the Navy, and she spends some time in Papua New Guinea, ends up crewing a ship, and then later in life has her own boat that she crews with a dog and a cat. She ends up at one point married in rural New South Wales and decides to start a pig farm because, that's something that you can just pick up. She works for an archbishop as a housemaid at one point. Yeah, it's just chock full of fascinating stories.
She's definitely experienced more than her fair share of loss. You mentioned about the first baby that was adopted, taken away from her, which she had no choice in the matter. Her first husband was killed in an accident just months after they were married. And then she lost her baby, who died just 13 hours after he was born. It's just brutal. So how does she recover from all that loss in her life?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really beautiful things about this story is that it is, one, she's just an incredible writer and it's really well crafted. But as you move through, there is this real sense of closure and of her making peace with the experiences that she's had in life. But that's not just an emotional working through her problems. She when the son that she didn't get to meet is old enough that it's legal, she tracks him down and discovers that he'd been searching for her as well, and she's able to have a relationship with him and with his adopted parents, and they develop a deep love for each other. So these moments of closure where the things that have haunted her come full circle and she's able to make peace with them. Even the some of her marriages, as you say, she was married 4 times, and those marriages went poorly for different reasons. And one of her husbands was abusive and she left him. But by the end of the story, she's been able to make contact with him and talk through the early years of their marriage and what went wrong. And he's realized what an awful person he was at that stage of his life, and apologized for that. And they've sort of been able to go on sort of 20 years on wishing each other well, and both kind of being reconciled to the things that happened back in the past.
I think the sort of little miracle in this story is that after she ran away from that pothead husband who was violent to her, she did eventually end up back in New Zealand and was reunited with her first love, Lance. Can you tell us a bit about their relationship?
Yeah, so that's another one of the things that makes her story incredible. When she is, I think, 20, she meets this man, Lance, and they were planning on getting married. But at that stage in her life, she was Catholic, and quite firm in her convictions in that. And as they were going through pre-marriage counselling with a priest, the priest informed Lance that he would have to become Catholic for them to get married, and he wasn't willing to do that. And she wasn't willing to compromise on it being a Catholic wedding. So at that stage, when they were very young, they very sadly decided to part ways, and they moved out of each other's lives for decades. And she re-meets him, decades later. And you know this all through the story, because as she's sharing anecdotes of the bookshops and the customers that she meets, Lance is there in the background making people cups of tea and doing renovations and things like that. So it's even in the points where the story has darkness in it, the interspersed narrative of the current day bookshop just gives you these little tidbits of hope that the story's going to come good, because you know that she's living a wonderful life with her first love in the present day.
That sounds amazing. I think I'd love to read that. What did you like about this book, Alanda?
Oh, so many things. Partly it's just like it's a book that's very easy to pick up and just be really drawn into, partly because so much happens and it's so interesting. And for those of us from Australia or New Zealand, there's so much that connects with things we know. Like it's set in Sydney and Armidale and Melbourne and kind of all over New Zealand as well. So there's a lot that's familiar, but the story gives you a sense of the history of those places. But I think one of the things I did appreciate the most, well, actually two things. One, I work in a bookshop, so I very much resonate with her stories of all the odd customers that come in. Her bookshops are very, very charming. It is genuinely, they're called two-wee bookshops. And one is basically a tiny garden shed sized kids bookshop, and she has stuffed animals that kids can come and borrow for a sleepover, and then they return them and she washes them. So some of the stories of the customers, be they kids or backpackers that come in, are just beautiful and charming and remind me of my present day life, working in a bookshop in quite a quirky town. So I'm always keen to hear stories of other booksellers living the dream. But I think, one of the really special things about the story as a biography is just how there is a thread running all the way through of these relationships with her child, these things that come full circle and give it a real narrative depth and resonance, I think, that make it quite a special story. It's not just a crazy adventure, and it's not just funny anecdotes of a bookshop. There's some real depth and beauty to the story as well.
Is there anything that you've taken out of it personally, that you've found encouraging or inspiring?
Yeah, probably the biggest inspiration. It's set in an era where if you're a bit of a go-getter, you can just get any job. She does so many different things through it, from like pig farming, as I mentioned, to sailing ships. She's always got some cooking job. She somehow gets a job as a nurse at some point, but it was a little bit inspiring of just, you can do anything. Just like, who's going to tell you that you're not qualified for that? Just go and give it a go. And I mean, if that means, stealing interview clothes off someone else's clothesline and then returning them a week later so that you can get a job, then like, what's going to stop you, kind of thing. So it's just watching the wild things that she does kind of makes you go, oh, I could do that.
She is audacious. And when I saw that story about how she took close off the line of a neighbour to go to a job interview, but then return them with a note apologising.
Yeah.
He just,
Yes.
it's like, wow, what a woman.
Yes.
Thanks, Orlando. That's Orlando Joyce from The Little Lost Bookshop, and we've been talking about The Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw. It certainly makes me want to visit that part of New Zealand, that's for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Ruth really had to have her arm twisted to write her story. She didn't think she had anything special to say. And what I want to know is, would either of you ever consider writing a memoir? And if so, what would it be called? Katrina, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some pretty strange jobs that I feel like could be turned into quite some quite interesting stories. I feel like I'd probably be a little bit either too self-indulgent or too dismissive of my own experience to write it myself. So autobiography I think is really hard, actually. I think it's easier to write somebody else's life than to write your own. So maybe I could get somebody else to write it for me. But I think I've been very clever because I have worked out what the title of my biography should be. I think I want to call it Persuaded, right? So this has two different parts to it, right? So I'm a Jane Austen person.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody, if you've listened to this podcast ever before, you know that I'm a Jane Austen person. Jane Austen's final novel was called Persuasion. So it ties into my Jane Austen fanaticism and how Jane Austen has shaped my life. But it also reminds me of one of my favorite Bible verses, Romans 8:38-39, which says, wait for it, "For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." So I feel like this word persuaded can cover both my love of Austen and my love of Jesus, which are kind of two big important parts of my life. So there you go.
Thanks, Katrina. I think that's the first time we've had a scripture quoted in the Hope Book Club.
Winner!
Good job,
Thanks,
Katrina.
Katrina. And what about you, Orlando?
So at this stage of my life, I mean, I'm sure I'll do many other things, but I think at this point, my autobiography would be part Diaries of Adrian Plass style, part Bookseller at the End of the World. And I think it would be called The Diary of a Wandering Bookseller at this stage. So anecdotes, sometimes maybe gently poking fun at all the funny things that church people and conference organizers do, and part beautiful stories of life on the road, traveling around for conferences and things like that. Yeah,
I'd read that. I think that sounds good. I think you're going to have both of you, you're going to have publishing offers after this episode gets out there. The first thing I thought of for my own memoir would be like, well, I tried, because I feel like a lot of my life was like, I've tried to write some stuff and not all of it has got published.
It's a good title.
I've tried really hard to have my babies. I had a lot of miscarriages and I just kept trying. I feel like I've tried to contribute something and do a good radio show and raise some good kids. And I feel like I haven't necessarily been successful in all those things, but I feel like, well, I've tried would kind of sum up my life. The other title I thought of, which I really like, but I don't know what the book is, was A Bend in the River. Because when I was a kid growing up in this tiny town of Darlington Point, every time you would tell someone you came from Darlington Point and that this was like 650 kilometres inland, they would go, what's the point? Like, how is there a point if you're in the middle of nowhere? And the town was just on a bend in the river. That's why it was called Darlington Point. And I feel like a bend in the river would really work as a metaphor for many things that have happened to me in my life. You know, it's like there's been no straight lines. All the things in my life that I've ever aspired to or tried to do, they've never come easily. It's always been a bit of a tortuous route, but we've gotten there eventually. So, yeah.
I think that's a great title.
Yeah, I think people would find some real resonance in those titles.
Thanks. Maybe one day I'll do it, or maybe not. Anyway, on to the book that I've been reading. So I've been reading A Funny Life by Michael McIntyre. Have either of you read this?
No.
Yep. I actually read it straight after reading Trevor Noah, and the contrast between them was quite amazing.
Yeah, so Michael McIntyre also has another biography, one he wrote earlier, which was very much about his early life, whereas this one is really about what happened to him after his, big performance at the Royal Variety Show where he kind of busted out. And the surprising thing is that, it's not an easy journey for him. So, but look, I picked this up because I've always liked his comedy. And so I thought, well, the book might be funny. And I guess I was just surprised at how, even though he has this phenomenal success, he's still basically just a person. And Michael McIntyre had like a lot of financial troubles. He was living in this tiny little rented flat where nothing worked, and he only had a half bath. They really were renting a place that was falling apart even while he was becoming this successful comedian. And so I really related particularly to his real estate nightmares and how hard it is to buy your first place, something I still haven't managed to do. And he has some really appalling crashes, where he totally bombs out. So hosting the BAFTAs, completely fails to get a laugh with this very stiff formal audience. He gets overlooked at the Edinburgh Fringe. He keeps thinking he's going to win this award for Best New Talent and never does. He gets dumped by Simon Cowell from Britain's Got Talent. He has a failed TV chat show. There's one scene where he has to leave a show in an ambulance after he's dislocated his shoulder, and he's literally lying on the stage screaming in pain for ages, and the audience just keeps laughing because they think it's a joke. So, there's a lot of ups and downs, even though he is an incredibly successful comedian. And I think the thing that I liked about this book is that no matter how badly things go, he has these two people who are just on his side all the time. There's his agent, Addison, who is this huge, larger-than-life character. And then there's his wife, Kitty, who we still can't ever actually really believe married him. He's constantly sort of like, what does she see in me? Which is really sweet. And so, yeah, I think all the same qualities that make Michael McIntyre's comedy relatable make his book relatable. And that said, the reverse is probably true. If you don't like his comedy, you're probably not really going to like his book, because a lot of it is sort of the evolution of those comedy sketches that many of us would know about, like leaving the house with children and how they came to life. So yeah, it's definitely a funny book, but it's also heartwarming. And I don't know, I really found myself batting for him when I read it. Would you agree, Katrina?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really like about his comedy is he doesn't target people. Listen to a lot of comedians who just kind of go after people and it feels mean. His comedy tends to target, particular situations, like that one, that hilarious. I love that skit about parents trying to leave the house. It's not being mean about anyone. It's just, here's a funny situation in life that I'm going to make fun of. His biography felt similar in that, the people that he meets, like, he just seems to love everybody. He finds everybody endlessly entertaining.
Well, except for Terry.
Interesting.
Terry, who's his hopeless assistant. But even though he makes fun of Terry, he does it fairly lightly.
He does it fairly lightly. He doesn't kind of dig in hard to people in that sort of way. Like, you could see, especially with someone like Terry, how much he could have been the butt of significantly more jokes than he actually was. But it felt a kind memoir in a lot of ways. Funny, but not in that kind of mean sort of way, which I really liked about it.
Yeah, to me. And I've certainly decided now that I've read his book that if he ever comes back to Australia, I have to go. Because I feel like I know him now.
I'll go with you. We can go together.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Well, thanks, ladies. That is all for this episode, our biography episode. If you want to share your thoughts about any of the books that we've talked about, you can email us, bookclub@hopemedia.com.au. And in this episode, we have reviewed Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood by Trevor Noah, The Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw, and A Funny Life by Michael McIntyre. Thanks for listening to the Hope Book Club, because life's just better with a book.
Hope 103.2. Thanks for listening.